In the remote wilderness of a northern forest near the U.S. Canada border, a solitary woman armed only with a camera was about to confront one of the world's most dangerous wildlife trafficking networks. What started as a routine surveillance operation took a shocking turn when she came face to face with military-trained poachers systematically stripping the forest of its rarest animals. Maya Lin wasn't your typical wildlife photographer. For over a decade, she had spent her life tracking endangered species across Southeast Asia and Africa, known for her ability to disappear into the wilderness and emerge with evidence that others couldn't obtain. But 3 years of self-imposed exile in the mountains had followed a devastating ambush in Indonesia that killed her entire research team. When she spotted movement in the clearing after 8 hours of patient waiting, she had no idea she was walking into a confrontation with Eli Mercer's international trafficking operation. Maya's decision to follow the poachers deeper into the forest, rather than retreat to safety, would lead to a deadly game of cat and mouse that would expose corruption reaching into the highest levels of government. What began as one woman's attempt to document illegal activity would become a mission to dismantle a criminal network spanning 3 continents. The entire North American wilderness would never be the same after Maya Lin stepped out of the shadows to become the weapon that law enforcement had been waiting for. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The forest held its breath in the hour before dawn, and Maya Lin moved through it like a shadow given form. Her boots made no sound on the carpet of frost-stiffened leaves, each step placed with the deliberate care of someone who understood that survival often depended on silence. The October air bit at her exposed skin, sharp enough to make her eyes water, but she welcomed the cold. It would keep her alert during the long hours ahead. Beside her, Echo padded through the undergrowth with the fluid grace of his wild heritage. The wolf dog's amber eyes swept constantly from side to side, his dark coat blending seamlessly with the pre-dawn shadows. At 4 years old, he was fully grown but still carried the watchful tension of an animal that remembered hunger, remembered fear. Maya had rescued him as a pup in Indonesia, the only living thing she'd managed to bring back from that disaster. Now he was her constant companion, her early warning system, and sometimes the only barrier between her and the crushing weight of isolation. The northern forest stretched endlessly in all directions, a dense tapestry of towering pines, ancient oaks, and thick undergrowth that hadn't been disturbed by logging in over 50 years. This section of the national forest, less than 20 miles from the Canadian border, was remote enough that most hikers never ventured this deep. The nearest road was a 7-mile hike through terrain that would challenge even experienced outdoorsmen. It was exactly the kind of place someone would choose if they wanted to operate without observation. Maya paused at the edge of a small clearing, her breath forming silver clouds in the frigid air. According to her GPS, she was exactly where Jonas Dale had suggested she position herself. The ranger had been cryptic during their brief meeting at the general store in town, speaking in the careful way of a man who suspected something but couldn't prove it. "Lot of unusual activity up in Sector 7, he'd said, refilling his coffee cup with deliberate slowness. Animals acting spooked. Tracks that don't belong. Could be nothing, but he'd shrugged, but his eyes had held the weight of genuine concern. She checked her watch. 4:47 a.m. Perfect timing. She had perhaps 30 minutes before the sun crested the ridge to the east, and she wanted to be completely invisible by then. Maya surveyed the terrain with the methodical thoroughness that had once made her one of the most respected wildlife trackers in Southeast Asia. The clearing was roughly circular, maybe 60 yards across, with a game trail cutting through its center. Deer sign was abundant, hoofprints pressed into the damp earth, browse lines on the lower branches of saplings, scattered pellets that suggested this was a regular feeding area. On the far side of the clearing, a natural blind had formed where a massive oak had fallen years ago, its trunk creating a barrier, while its upturned root system provided additional concealment. It was perfect. Maya worked quickly but carefully, assembling her observation post with practiced efficiency. The blind was a marvel of modern field technology. Lightweight carbon fiber frames that locked together without tools, camouflage netting treated with scent-masking compounds, and a waterproof ground sheet that would keep her dry during the long vigil ahead. Within 15 minutes, she had created a concealed position that would be virtually undetectable from more than 20 feet away. Her equipment was arranged with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. The primary camera was a military-grade telephoto system capable of capturing clear images at distances up to 2 miles. Beside it sat a parabolic microphone that could isolate and amplify conversations from hundreds of yards away. A satellite communication device, smaller than a paperback book, would allow her to maintain contact with the outside world. And always within reach, the backup camera, a smaller, silent unit that could continue recording even if the primary system was compromised. Echo settled beside her with a soft whiff of expelled breath, his body warm against her leg. She scratched behind his ears, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders at the simple contact. He was the one constant in her life now, the only relationship that hadn't been poisoned by what happened in Indonesia 3 years ago. As if summoned by the thought, her satellite communicator vibrated with an incoming message. The display showed Ravi's call sign, data stream. All systems nominal. Your position registered. ETA to sunrise, 27 minutes. Stay frosty out there, ghost. Maya smiled despite herself. Ravi Singh had never met her in person, but he'd been her remote support for over 2 years now, handling everything from weather data to equipment logistics from his cluttered graduate lab at the university. He was brilliant, neurotic, and absolutely devoted to the work they did together. Most importantly, he had never asked her about Indonesia, never pushed for details about why one of the field's rising stars had suddenly vanished into the wilderness. She typed back quickly. Position established. Going dark until 1400 unless emergency. Keep the coffee warm. Copy that. Try not to become bear food. Maya powered down the communicator and settled into her position. Now came the hardest part, the waiting. She pulled out a thermos of black coffee, still steaming hot, and took a careful sip. The warmth spread through her chest, pushing back against the cold that was already seeping through her layered clothing. This would be her last hot drink for the next 8 hours. After sunrise, any movement or scent could give away her position. As the first pale light began to filter through the canopy above, Maya's mind wandered to the reason she was here. For the past 6 months, reports had been filtering through unofficial channels about increased poaching activity in the borderlands. Not the casual, opportunistic hunting that game wardens dealt with regularly, but something organized and systematic. Rare species were disappearing from areas where they should have been protected. Traps were being discovered that showed military-level sophistication. And most disturbing of all, several wildlife enforcement officers had reported feeling watched during their patrols, as if someone was studying their routes and schedules. The official response had been predictably bureaucratic. Forms were filed, investigations were opened, and nothing substantive was done. Too much territory to cover, too few personnel, too little hard evidence. Maya had watched the same pattern play out in Indonesia, in Kenya, in half a dozen other places where she'd worked. By the time the authorities acted, the damage was usually irreversible. But this time she had the chance to do something about it. Maya reached into her pack and withdrew a photograph, its edges worn soft from handling. 7 people stood in jungle fatigues beside a military transport helicopter, their faces bright with the confidence of a team that trusted each other completely. She was in the center, looking impossibly young at 26, her arm around the shoulders of Deka, the Indonesian ranger who had become her closest friend in the field. All of them were dead now except her. She had made the call to hold position when the ambush started. She had been the senior tracker, the one with the most experience, the one the team looked to for decisions. When the first shots came from the ridge above their camp, she had ordered everyone to take cover and wait for backup, instead of attempting to withdraw. It had seemed like the right choice. They were outnumbered. Moving in daylight would have made them easy targets, and reinforcements were supposedly only an hour away. But the backup never came. The intelligence that had placed her team in that valley had been compromised from the beginning. By the time she realized the truth, by the time she tried to get her people out, it was too late. Maya folded the photograph and tucked it away. She had carried that guilt for 3 years, let it drive her into isolation and self-imposed exile. But sitting here in the cold dawn, waiting and watching as she had trained herself to do, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Purpose. The sun crested the ridge, sending shafts of golden light slanting through the forest. Maya pulled on her face mask, adjusted her position to minimize any chance of reflection from her equipment, and began the long watch. At 6:15 a.m., she noticed the first sign that something was wrong. The disturbance was subtle, a section of moss near the main game trail that had been recently disturbed, the kind of scuff mark that might be left by a boot sole dragged across the ground. Maya focused her telephoto lens on the area, zooming in until she could see individual fibers that had been torn from the moss surface. The pattern was consistent with someone trying to obscure their tracks, but doing it hastily, carelessly. Maya's pulse quickened. In her experience, people who tried to hide their presence in the wilderness usually had good reason to do so. She panned the camera slowly across the rest of the clearing, looking for additional signs. There, another disturbance. This one near the fallen log on the opposite side of the clearing. And there, a broken branch at shoulder height, the kind of thing that happened when someone moved through unfamiliar terrain in low light. Someone had been here recently. Someone who knew enough to try to cover their tracks, but not enough to do it properly. Maya settled deeper into her blind and adjusted the settings on her camera. Whatever was going to happen, she would be ready to document it. At 7:43 a.m., she caught the first glimpse of movement in the distant tree line. It was nothing more than a flicker, a momentary change in the pattern of shadows that could have been a bird taking flight or a squirrel moving through the branches. But Echo's ears pricked forward, and Maya trusted the wolf dog's senses more than her own eyes. She held her breath and waited. By noon, Maya's world had contracted to the narrow field of view through her telephoto lens and the steady rhythm of Echo's breathing beside her. The morning had passed in a symphony of small sounds, the distant call of ravens, the rustle of wind through dying leaves, the occasional crack of a branch settling in the growing warmth of the day. Her coffee had long since grown cold, and the sandwich she'd packed remained untouched in her bag. Food and comfort were luxuries that belonged to a different world, one where patience wasn't measured in the spaces between heartbeats. The cold had settled into her bones despite her layers of technical clothing, and her left leg had gone numb from maintaining the same position for hours. But Maya didn't move. Couldn't move. Every instinct honed by years in the field told her that something was building, that the forest was holding secrets just beyond the edge of perception. At 12:17 p.m., her satellite communicator vibrated with another message from Ravi. Status check. All quiet on the Western Front? Maya considered responding, but the device's subtle glow might be visible through her camouflage netting. Instead, she let the message go unanswered. Ravi would understand. Radio silence was part of the protocol they'd established for extended surveillance operations. The waiting was the hardest part. It always had been, even in the early days when she'd been tracking leopards in Borneo or monitoring elephant migration patterns in Tanzania. The human mind wasn't designed for this kind of sustained attention, this forced stillness that bordered on meditation. It was a skill that had to be learned, practiced, and constantly refined. Maya had become very good at waiting. At 12:34 p.m., Echo's body went rigid against her leg. The change was instant and unmistakable. One moment the wolf dog had been relaxed, almost drowsy in the afternoon warmth. The next, every muscle in his body was coiled like a spring, his amber eyes fixed on something beyond Maya's field of vision. His lips pulled back slightly, revealing the tips of his canine teeth, but he made no sound. Echo had learned the rules of the vigil as thoroughly as Maya herself. Maya slowly shifted her camera toward the direction of Echo's gaze, moving with the glacial patience of a sniper adjusting her scope. Through the telephoto lens, the forest leaped into crystalline detail. Every leaf, every shadow, every potential hiding place was suddenly magnified and exposed. There, movement in the tree line, perhaps 400 yards distant. Maya's breath caught in her throat as a figure emerged from the dense undergrowth at the far edge of the clearing. Even at this distance, even through the visual distortion of heat shimmer and intervening vegetation, she could see that this was no casual hiker or lost hunter. The figure moved with the fluid, purposeful gait of someone trained in tactical movement. His clothing was military-style camouflage, but not the standard woodland pattern used by most hunters. This was something more sophisticated, a digital pattern that seemed to shift and blend with the surrounding forest in ways that conventional camouflage couldn't match. He carried what appeared to be a military-style rifle, and from the way he held it, Maya could tell he was comfortable with the weapon. She began photographing immediately, the camera's silent electronic shutter capturing frame after frame as the figure moved across her field of view. Each image would be automatically time-stamped and GPS tagged, creating an electronic record that could serve as evidence if needed. The figure paused at the edge of the clearing, and Maya held her breath. Through her lens, she could see him scanning the area with methodical precision of someone conducting a security sweep. His head moved in small, deliberate arcs, and she realized he was probably wearing some form of electronic optical equipment, night vision or thermal imaging gear adapted for daylight use. After nearly a full minute of observation, the figure apparently satisfied himself that the area was clear. He stepped into the clearing and began moving toward the center, toward the game trail where Maya had noticed the disturbed moss earlier that morning. Maya's camera continued its silent documentation as the figure knelt beside the trail and began unpacking equipment from a military-style backpack. She watched in growing alarm as he assembled what was clearly a sophisticated trap. Not the crude snares or leg-hold traps typically used by poachers, but something that looked more like an explosive device adapted for capturing rather than killing. The implications hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't random poaching. This was a systematic operation designed to capture specific animals alive, probably for transport to buyers who valued rarity over legality. The exotic animal trade was one of the world's most lucrative criminal enterprises, worth billions of dollars annually and virtually impossible to stop once it became entrenched in an area. As Maya watched, a second figure emerged from the tree line. This one was smaller, younger, moving with less confidence than the first. He carried a radio pack and what appeared to be electronic monitoring equipment. Maya adjusted her camera settings for maximum telephoto range and began capturing images of both figures as they worked. The audio pickup from her parabolic microphone was marginal at this distance, but she could make out fragments of conversation carried on the still air. Placement confirmed. Trigger sensitivity. Shipment schedule, 48 hours. Backup site if this one's compromised. Maya's blood ran cold. They were discussing multiple sites, multiple operations. This wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger network. She was so focused on the audio feed that she almost missed the moment when the first figure looked directly toward her position. Maya froze, not even daring to breathe, as the figure stood slowly and took a step in her direction. Through her lens, she could see his face for the first time. Angular features, cold eyes, the kind of face that belonged to someone accustomed to violence. He raised what she now realized was military-grade binoculars and began scanning the tree line where her blind was concealed. For what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds, Maya stared into those binoculars through her telephoto lens, wondering if he could somehow see her despite her concealment. The camouflage blind had been designed to be undetectable to visual observation, but if he had thermal imaging capability. Beside her, Echo remained perfectly still, but she could feel the tension radiating from his body like heat from a furnace. The wolf dog's instincts were screaming danger, but his training held him motionless. Finally, after a search that seemed to last forever, the figure lowered his binoculars and turned back to his companion. Maya slowly released the breath she'd been holding, her heart hammering against her ribs. The two figures completed their trap setup with practiced efficiency, then began moving toward the opposite side of the clearing. Maya continued photographing, documenting every piece of equipment, every technique, every detail that might be useful to law enforcement later. As they prepared to disappear back into the forest, she heard one more fragment of conversation, this one clear enough to be unmistakable. "Tell Eli the site is prepped. We'll have confirmation by Thursday." Eli. Maya's camera nearly slipped from her numb fingers as the name hit her like a physical blow. She had heard that name before, in the unofficial reports that filtered through the shadowy network of field researchers and wildlife enforcement officers. Eli Mercer, former military contractor, suspected of involvement in illegal wildlife trafficking across 3 continents. The man was a ghost, a rumor, someone who operated so far outside official channels that most law enforcement agencies weren't even sure he really existed. But he was here, operating in her forest, in the wilderness she had chosen as her refuge from the world and its horrors. As the two figures vanished back into the tree line, Maya finally allowed herself to move. Her muscles screamed in protest as she shifted position, blood flowing back into her numb leg like fire through her veins. Echo stretched and yawned, the tension leaving his body now that the immediate threat had passed. Maya checked her camera. 47 photographs, all automatically backed up to the satellite storage system. Clear images of faces, equipment, and procedures. More evidence than any law enforcement agency had ever collected on this network. For the first time in 3 years, she felt something that might have been hope. But as she began the careful process of breaking down her observation post, a darker realization crept into her mind. These weren't casual criminals stumbling through the wilderness. They were professionals, and professionals didn't operate without security protocols. They would have counter-surveillance procedures, backup plans, ways of detecting if they were being watched. Maya paused in her packing, a terrible thought taking shape. She pulled out her binoculars and carefully scanned the tree line where the figures had disappeared, looking for any sign of movement, any indication that they might have left someone behind to watch for watchers. The forest looked empty, peaceful, innocent, but Maya had learned not to trust appearances. The sun was settling toward the western horizon when Maya finally made her decision. Every rational instinct told her to retreat, to take her photographs back to civilization and turn them over to the proper authorities. Agent Lara Quinton with the Wildlife Enforcement Division had been trying to build a case against the trafficking networks for months. The images Maya had captured would be exactly the kind of hard evidence Quinton needed to justify a major investigation. But as Maya knelt in the growing twilight, checking and rechecking her equipment, she kept hearing those fragments of conversation. Shipment schedule. 48 hours. Whatever Eli Mercer and his team were planning, it was going to happen soon. By the time she hiked back to her truck, drove to the nearest cell tower, and briefed law enforcement, it might be too late. Echo sat beside her, his amber eyes reflecting the last light of day. The wolf dog seemed to sense her internal conflict, his head cocked slightly to one side in the questioning expression she had come to know so well. "What do you think, boy?" she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "Follow them or go home?" Echo's tail thumped once against the ground, a soft sound that somehow felt like an answer. Maya made her choice. Moving with the careful precision of someone who understood that a single careless step could mean disaster, she began tracking the two figures through the darkening forest. The skills came back to her as if she had never stopped using them, reading broken twigs and disturbed undergrowth, following the almost invisible trail of footprints and scent markers that every human left behind in the wilderness. Echo padded ahead of her, his superior senses providing early warning of obstacles and hazards. The wolf dog had an uncanny ability to anticipate the path their quarry had taken, sometimes veering away from the obvious route to intercept the actual trail 50 yards further along. After an hour of careful tracking, Maya caught the first glimpse of artificial light through the trees ahead. She called Echo back with a silent hand signal and approached the final 100 yards with extreme caution, using every piece of cover available. What she found when she finally gained a clear view made her stomach clench with professional recognition. The poachers had established a temporary base camp in a natural depression, perhaps half a mile from the clearing where she had first observed them. It was a textbook example of military-style field operations: minimal footprint, natural concealment, multiple exit routes, and sophisticated equipment that spoke of serious funding. 3 military surplus tents were arranged in a triangular pattern around a central area where communications equipment had been set up. Solar panels, nearly invisible under camouflage netting, provided power for encrypted radios and what appeared to be satellite uplink capability. Maya counted at least 5 men moving around the camp, all of them carrying military-style weapons and moving with the casual competence of professional soldiers. But it was the equipment in the center of the camp that made Maya's blood run cold. Transport cages. Dozens of them, ranging in size from containers suitable for birds to enclosures large enough to hold a wolf or mountain lion. They were made from military-grade materials and designed for rapid deployment and breakdown. Some were already occupied. Maya focused her telephoto lens on the nearest cage and felt her heart sink. A young lynx paced restlessly inside the enclosure, its spotted coat dulled with stress and poor diet. In the cage beside it, a great horned owl sat motionless on a perch, its feathers missing in patches that suggested illness or neglect. These weren't just poachers. They were systematically stripping the forest of its rarest inhabitants, everything from predatory birds to small carnivores that commanded high prices in the illegal wildlife trade. Maya continued her documentation, photographing every piece of equipment, every animal, every detail that might be useful to investigators. her camera's memory filled with images that would serve as an indictment of the entire operation. As she worked, fragments of conversation drifted across from the camp. Beijing buyer confirmed for the owl shipment. 3 more traps to service tomorrow. Eli wants the lynx moved to the secondary holding facility. Maya's pulse quickened at the mention of the secondary facility. This camp was apparently just one node in a larger network, which meant the scale of the operation was even bigger than she had imagined. She was so focused on her photography that she almost missed the approach of footsteps behind her. Echo's low growl was the only warning she got before a voice spoke from the darkness perhaps 20 feet away. "Well, well, what have we here?" Maya's blood turned to ice. She had been so focused on documenting the camp that she had forgotten the first rule of wilderness surveillance. Never assume you're the only one watching. She turned slowly, her hands held carefully away from her camera and equipment, to find herself facing a tall figure in full tactical gear. Even in the dim light, she could see the cold intelligence in his eyes, the relaxed confidence of someone who held all the advantages. Eli Mercer himself. "You know," he continued in a conversational tone, "in my line of work, we don't usually get wildlife photographers working this far off the beaten path. Especially not at night. Especially not with the kind of professional equipment you're carrying." Maya remained silent, her mind racing through possibilities. She was outnumbered, outgunned, and miles from help. But she was also holding evidence that could destroy Eli's entire operation, if she could find a way to get it to the right people. "Now, I could just assume you're some kind of nature enthusiast who happened to wander into the wrong place at the wrong time," Eli continued, taking a step closer. "But the thing is, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've developed an instinct for when someone is watching me with professional interest. You've got that look, miss?" Maya met his eyes steadily. "Lynn. Maya Lynn." "Maya Lynn." Eli seemed to roll the name around in his mouth, tasting it. "Now why does that name sound familiar? Maya Lynn. Wildlife tracker, wasn't it? Used to work in Southeast Asia before dropping off the radar a few years ago. Had some kind of incident in Indonesia, if I remember correctly." The mention of Indonesia hit Maya like a physical blow, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm just a photographer now." "Photographer?" Eli's smile was cold as winter moonlight. "With military-grade telephoto equipment and camouflage gear that costs more than most people make in a year." "Right." He gestured toward Echo, who had remained motionless but alert at Maya's side. "Nice dog. Looks like he's got some wolf in him. That's illegal in most states, you know. Keeping hybrid animals without proper permits." "He's licensed." "I'm sure he is." Eli's radio crackled with an incoming transmission, and he held up one finger. "Hold that thought." As he turned his attention to the radio, Maya's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward the emergency transmission button on her satellite communicator. If she could trigger a distress beacon, Ravi might be able to coordinate some kind of rescue operation. Or at least he would know what had happened to her. But Eli was already turning back, and his smile had grown wider. "You know what's funny?" he said. "I was just getting a report from my security team. Seems like someone's been using encrypted satellite communications from this area for the past few hours. Same frequency signature as the equipment you're carrying." Maya's heart sank. They had been monitoring her communications all along. "So here's what I think happened," Eli continued. "I think you've been watching us all day. Taking pictures. Gathering evidence. I think you're working with some kind of law enforcement agency, probably federal, and you think you've stumbled onto the story of the century." He took another step closer, and Maya could see her own reflection in his cold eyes. "The question is, what am I going to do about it?" Before Maya could respond, Echo moved. The wolf dog had been trained never to attack humans, but years of living in the wilderness had awakened instincts that no amount of domestication could completely suppress. He launched himself at Eli's throat with the fluid grace of his wild ancestors, 60 pounds of muscle and fury moving faster than human reflexes could follow. Eli stumbled backward, more surprised than hurt, his rifle swinging wide as he fought to keep his balance. Maya didn't waste the opportunity. She grabbed her camera equipment and sprinted toward the darkness beyond the camp's perimeter, Echo at her heels. Behind her, she could hear Eli shouting orders to his men, the sound of equipment being rapidly mobilized. They would be after her within minutes, and they knew this terrain as well as she did. But Maya had one advantage they didn't know about. She had spent 3 years learning to disappear, learning to become invisible in the wilderness. And now, for the first time since Indonesia, she had a reason to use those skills for something more than simple survival. As she plunged deeper into the forest, her satellite communicator clutched in one hand and her camera in the other, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the fierce joy of the hunt. She was no longer just a witness to the predators in her forest. She was hunting them back. Maya's boots pounded against the forest floor as she crashed through undergrowth that seemed determined to slow her escape. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. Men's voices calling coordinates to each other, the snap of branches under heavy boots, the mechanical whine of night vision equipment being powered up. They were hunting her with the systematic efficiency of a military search-and-destroy operation, and Maya knew that in a straight chase across unfamiliar terrain she would lose. Echo ran beside her, his tongue lolling from exertion but his pace never faltering. The wolf dog seemed to understand the gravity of their situation, his wild instincts fully engaged as he navigated the treacherous footing of the darkened forest. More than once, his subtle change of direction steered Maya away from hidden obstacles, fallen logs, sudden drop-offs, patches of marshy ground that would have left clear tracks for their pursuers to follow. Maya's mind raced as fast as her feet, calculating distances and options with the desperate clarity that came with mortal danger. The nearest road was still over 6 miles away, and her truck was parked at a trailhead that Eli's people had probably already discovered. Her satellite communicator had been damaged during the initial escape, its screen cracked and unresponsive. Even if she could reach civilization, she had no way to call for help. But she still had her camera, and the memory cards it contained represented the most comprehensive documentation of an illegal wildlife trafficking operation that law enforcement had ever collected. As long as she could protect that evidence, as long as she could find a way to get it to the right people, Eli's entire network could be brought down. The thought gave her strength, even as her lungs burned from the exertion of running at altitude in the thin mountain air. A spotlight beam swept through the trees, perhaps 100 yards behind her, its harsh white light throwing grotesque shadows across the forest floor. Maya veered away from the illumination, using a technique she had learned in Indonesia. Never run in straight lines. Always assume your pursuers have better equipment than you do, and when possible, use their advantages against them. Night vision equipment was effective, but it had limitations. Users became dependent on the artificial enhancement, and their natural night vision deteriorated. Take away their electronic eyes, force them to rely on normal sight in the darkness, and even well-trained soldiers could be reduced to stumbling amateurs. Maya led her pursuers deeper into the forest, toward terrain she remembered from her initial reconnaissance of the area. There was a section where the canopy grew so thick that almost no starlight penetrated to the forest floor, where fallen timber created a maze of obstacles that would be treacherous even in daylight. As she ran, Maya began implementing the scent-masking techniques that had kept her alive during her worst days in Southeast Asia. She broke off branches of pine and fir, crushing the needles between her hands and rubbing the aromatic oils across her clothing and exposed skin. She splashed through every stream and puddle she could find, knowing that water would disrupt the thermal signatures that their equipment might be tracking. Most importantly, she began to think like her prey instead of her predators. Maya had spent years studying animal behavior, learning to anticipate how creatures moved through their environment when threatened. Prey animals didn't just run. They used terrain. They doubled back on their own trails. They found places where larger predators couldn't follow. They survived not through superior speed or strength, but through superior knowledge of their environment. The forest became her ally. After 40 minutes of hard running, Maya's luck ran out. She was picking her way down a steep slope, using tree roots and rock outcroppings for handholds, when her boots slipped on a patch of wet leaves. Her ankle twisted with a sharp pop that she felt as much as heard, and she tumbled down the slope in a controlled fall that nonetheless left her gasping with pain. Echo was beside her instantly, whining softly and nosing at her injured leg with gentle concern. Maya bit back a cry as she tested the ankle, probing the joint with careful fingers. Not broken, but badly sprained. She could walk on it, maybe even run for short distances, but her mobility was now severely compromised. The sounds of pursuit had faded during her detour through the dense forest, but Maya knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Eli's people were professionals, and professionals didn't give up easily. They would widen their search pattern, bring in additional resources, maybe even call in helicopters with thermal imaging capability. It was only a matter of time before they found her trail again. Maya pulled out her damaged satellite communicator and tried once more to power it up. The screen flickered weakly, showing corrupted data and error messages, but for a brief moment she saw a signal indicator. 2 bars, barely enough for voice communication, if she could find higher ground. She looked around, trying to orient herself in the darkness. According to her mental map, she was perhaps 2 miles from the old firewatch tower that she had used as a reference point during her initial survey of the area. The tower had been abandoned for years, but it might still have emergency communication equipment. More importantly, its elevated position would give her the high ground advantage if Eli's people found her there. Maya made her decision. Using a sturdy branch as a makeshift crutch, she began the painful journey toward the tower, Echo ranging ahead to scout for obstacles and threats. The next hour was a nightmare of endurance. Every step sent fire shooting up her leg, and the rough terrain seemed designed to test the limits of her determination. But Maya had learned to embrace pain during her exile in the wilderness, to treat it as information rather than an enemy. The ankle would hold. It had to hold. As she climbed toward higher ground, fragments of memory from Indonesia began surfacing unbidden. She remembered the weight of responsibility she had felt as the senior tracker on the team, the way her people had looked to her for guidance in an impossible situation. She remembered the radio call she had made, "Hold position, backup is en route," and the silence that had followed when that backup never arrived. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't responsible for anyone else's life. This time, if she made the wrong choice, only she would pay the price. The thought was oddly liberating. Maya's satellite communicator crackled to life just as she crested a ridge that brought the fire tower into view. The device's screen was still cracked, but power was flowing to the communications array. She had perhaps minutes of battery life remaining. She keyed in Ravi's emergency frequency, praying that her graduate student ally would be monitoring the channel. The response came immediately. "Ghost, is that you? Your signal dropped off the grid hours ago. I've been going crazy trying to reach you." Maya's voice was barely a whisper, conserved for maximum efficiency. "Compromised. Evidence secured. Need immediate law enforcement response at coordinates." She rattled off her GPS position from memory, hoping Ravi's equipment was sophisticated enough to triangulate her location from the weak signal. "Maya, you're breaking up. Say again your status." "Pursued by hostiles. Multiple subjects. Professional operation. Contact Agent Quinton, Wildlife Enforcement Division. Tell her it's Eli Mercer." The communicator's screen flickered and went dark. The battery was dead. But Maya had gotten through. Somewhere in a cluttered university lab, Ravi was probably already placing calls to federal agencies, coordinating a response that might arrive in time to matter. If she could stay alive long enough. Echo's growl was her first warning that they were no longer alone. The wolf dog had frozen in place, his amber eyes fixed on something in the darkness behind them. Maya turned, her injured ankle protesting the sudden movement, and saw the systematic sweep of flashlight beams through the trees below. 3 separate lights, moving in a coordinated search pattern, getting closer. They had found her trail. Maya abandoned stealth in favor of speed, half running and half falling toward the base of the fire tower. The structure loomed above her like a steel skeleton against the star-filled sky, its elevated platform perhaps 60 feet above the forest floor. The access ladder was on the opposite side from her pursuers, giving her a few minutes head start if she could reach it before they spotted her. Behind her, she heard Eli's voice cutting through the night. "She's heading for the tower. Johnson, circle around to the north. Parker, stay on this trail. I'll take the direct approach." Maya reached the base of the ladder just as the first flashlight beam swept across the tower's support structure. She began climbing as quickly as her injured ankle would allow, Echo pacing anxiously below, unable to follow. "Stay," she whispered down to the wolf dog. "Find cover. Wait for my signal." Echo disappeared into the undergrowth with the silent grace of his wild heritage, leaving Maya to face what was coming alone. The fire tower platform swayed gently in the mountain wind as Maya pulled herself up through the access hatch, her injured ankle screaming in protest. The observation deck was smaller than she remembered from her initial survey, perhaps 10 feet square, surrounded by a waist-high railing that offered minimal protection. Emergency equipment lockers were bolted to the inner walls, their padlocks corroded with years of weather and neglect. Maya worked quickly in the darkness, using her tactical knife to pry open the first locker. Inside, she found exactly what she had hoped for: an emergency radio system, battery-powered and designed to operate independently of external power sources. The equipment was old but appeared functional, its military surplus construction built to withstand decades of harsh conditions. As she powered up the radio system, Maya could hear her pursuers moving through the forest below. Eli's voice carried clearly in the still air, coordinating his team with the calm professionalism of someone who had done this many times before. "Johnson, what's your position?" "North side of the tower. No sign of movement up top, but she's got to be there. Nowhere else to go." "Parker?" "South approach secured. I've got eyes on some kind of large dog moving through the underbrush. Might be the animal she had with her." Maya's heart clenched with worry for Echo, but she forced herself to focus on the radio equipment. The device's display showed a weak but stable signal, enough to reach emergency frequencies if she could boost the transmission power. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She connected her camera to the radio's data port using a cable from her field kit. The camera's memory contained hundreds of photographs documenting Eli's operation: faces, equipment, animal cages, GPS coordinates. If she could transmit even a fraction of that data, it would provide law enforcement with everything they needed to shut down the trafficking network. The upload process began with agonizing slowness. Maya watched the progress bar creep forward as precious data flowed through the antiquated communications system. 1%, 2%. At this rate, the transmission would take nearly an hour to complete. She didn't have an hour. "You know," Eli's voice called from the base of the tower, "this doesn't have to end badly for you, Maya. You're obviously a professional, someone who understands how the world really works. There might be room for negotiation." Maya remained silent, watching the upload progress with growing desperation. 5% complete. "I know about Indonesia," Eli continued, his voice taking on a conversational tone that was somehow more menacing than direct threats. "I know about the rangers who died because someone made the wrong call. Must be hard, carrying that kind of guilt. Makes a person want to disappear, maybe find somewhere quiet where they can't hurt anyone else." The words hit Maya like physical blows, each one designed to find and exploit her deepest vulnerabilities. But she had lived with those ghosts for 3 years, had learned to function despite the crushing weight of her past failures. Eli's psychological warfare wouldn't break her now. 8% complete. "Here's what I think happened," Eli went on. "I think you came out here looking for some kind of redemption. Thought maybe if you could catch the bad guys this time, it would balance the scales somehow. But the thing is, Maya, the scales don't balance. The dead stay dead no matter how many pictures you take." Maya's hand moved to the photograph in her jacket pocket, the one showing her Indonesian team in happier times. Decca's face smiled up at her through the darkness, young and confident, and trusting in Maya's leadership. For a moment, the old guilt threatened to overwhelm her. Then she thought about the lynx in the cage, about the owl with its missing feathers, about all the animals that would die if Eli's network continued to operate. The dead couldn't be saved, but the living still could be. 12% complete. The sound of boots on the ladder's metal rungs echoed through the tower structure. Eli was climbing up. Maya looked around the platform desperately, searching for anything that could be used as a weapon or a defensive position. The emergency lockers contained a flare gun with 3 signal flares, a first aid kit, and an old emergency blanket. Not much against a trained killer, but better than nothing. She loaded a flare into the gun and positioned herself behind one of the equipment lockers, trying to present as small a target as possible. The radio continued its slow data transmission, the progress bar now showing 15% complete. Eli's head appeared through the access hatch, followed by his shoulders and the barrel of his rifle. He moved with the careful precision of someone who expected resistance, his eyes scanning the platform's shadows for signs of movement. "There you are," he said, spotting Maya's position behind the locker. "You know, I have to admit, I'm impressed. Most people wouldn't have made it this far." Maya kept the flare gun trained on him but remained silent. 17% complete. "That's an emergency radio you're using," Eli observed, glancing at the equipment. "Old military surplus. Probably takes forever to transmit any significant amount of data." "What are you uploading? Photos of my operation? Video documentation?" "Doesn't matter. You'll never get enough data through that antique to make a difference." 20% complete. Eli stepped fully onto the platform, his rifle now pointed directly at Maya's position. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to disconnect that equipment, hand over your camera and any other recording devices you might have, and we're going to walk out of here together. Simple transaction." "And then what?" Maya asked, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "You let me go? Promise not to hurt the animals you've already captured?" Eli's smile was cold as winter starlight. "I'm a practical man, Maya. I don't kill people unless it serves a purpose. You disappear back into whatever hole you've been hiding in for the past 3 years, and I continue my business elsewhere. Everyone wins. Except the animals. The animals were going to die anyway. At least this way, their deaths serve a purpose. Do you have any idea how much medical research depends on compounds derived from exotic species? How many human lives might be saved by the work my clients are doing?" Maya's finger tightened on the flare gun's trigger. "That's not research. That's exploitation. Call it whatever makes you feel better. The result is the same." 25% complete. Maya needed more time, needed some way to distract Eli while the transmission continued. She thought about Echo, somewhere in the darkness below, and hoped the wolf dog had the sense to stay hidden. "You're wrong about Indonesia," she said suddenly. "I didn't make the wrong call. I made the only call I could make with the information I had." Eli raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Because my sources say you had the option to withdraw your team when the situation started deteriorating. Instead, you ordered them to hold position and wait for backup that never came. The backup was compromised. The whole operation was compromised from the beginning. We were set up." "By who?" Maya met his eyes steadily. "By people like you, people who profit from chaos and death." Quote. For the first time, Eli's composure cracked slightly. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? Military contractors, private security firms, arms dealers who branch out into wildlife trafficking when the war business gets slow. It's all connected, Eli. Indonesia, this operation, all of it. 30% complete." The radio crackled with an incoming transmission. "Emergency services. This is Agent Lara Quinton, Wildlife Enforcement Division. We have units en route to your coordinates. Estimated time of arrival, 15 minutes. If you can hear this, maintain your position and await assistance." Maya felt a surge of hope, but Eli's expression darkened. "Backup's coming," she said. "Just like in Indonesia, except this time it's real." 15 minutes, Eli mused. "Plenty of time to clean up loose ends and disappear. You should have taken my offer when you had the chance." He raised his rifle, finger moving to the trigger. Maya fired the flare gun. The signal flare streaked across the platform in a burst of red fire, forcing Eli to dive sideways to avoid the burning projectile. The flare struck the tower's railing and exploded in a shower of sparks, filling the air with acrid smoke and brilliant red light. Maya used the distraction to scramble toward the opposite side of the platform, her injured ankle nearly giving out under her weight. Behind her, she could hear Eli cursing as he struggled to regain his footing. 35% complete. A gunshot echoed through the night, the bullet sparking off the metal platform inches from Maya's position. She rolled behind another equipment locker, loading her second flare into the gun. "You're only making this harder on yourself," Eli called out, his voice tight with anger. "There's nowhere to run up here." He was right. The platform was a trap, offering no real cover and no escape route except the ladder that Eli now controlled. But Maya had bought precious minutes for the data transmission, and help was coming. She just had to survive long enough for it to arrive. Another gunshot, this one closer. Maya risked a glance around the locker and saw Eli advancing methodically, using the smoke from the flare as concealment. His military training was evident in every movement, controlled, purposeful, deadly. 40% complete. Then, from somewhere below, came a sound that made Maya's heart leap. Echo's battle howl, wild and fierce and full of predatory rage. Echo's attack cry split the night like a blade, primal and terrifying in its intensity. Maya heard shouts from the men positioned around the tower's base, followed by the unmistakable sounds of a struggle. Cursing, the crash of undergrowth, and Johnson's voice raised in pain and alarm. "What the hell? That thing just came out of nowhere. Parker, get a shot on that animal. Can't get a clear line, it's moving too fast." Eli's attention was momentarily diverted by the chaos below, his head turning toward the sounds of his team's distress. Maya seized the opportunity, firing her second flare directly at the emergency radio equipment. The red projectiles struck the antenna array in an explosion of sparks and flame, sending burning fragments cascading across the platform. It was a desperate gambit, destroying her own lifeline to the outside world, but the brilliant illumination would serve as a beacon for the approaching rescue teams. More importantly, the radio's display showed 47% complete before the screen went dark. Nearly half of her photographic evidence had been transmitted successfully. Even if she didn't survive the next few minutes, the data would reach Agent Quinton. "Clever," Eli said, turning back to face her, his rifle trained on her position. "Signal flare to mark your location for the cavalry. But you just destroyed your only way to call for help, and my people will deal with your pet before your friends arrive." Maya gripped her final flare, knowing it represented her last chance. "Your people sound like they're having trouble with my pet." Indeed, the sounds from below suggested that Echo was giving Johnson and Parker more than they had bargained for. The wolf dog had learned to hunt in the wilderness, and his hybrid nature gave him advantages that no domestic animal could match. He was faster than a dog, more cunning than a wolf, and absolutely devoted to protecting Maya. 60 pounds of hybrid isn't going to stop trained operators, Eli said, but Maya could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "They'll put it down and come up here to finish what I started. Maybe, or maybe they'll be too busy dealing with a predator that knows this forest better than they do." Maya was buying time, hoping that Echo could create enough confusion to delay Eli's people until help arrived. But she could see in Eli's eyes that his patience was exhausted. He was done talking. "Last chance, Maya, give me the camera and I'll make this quick." Quote, "The camera data is already uploaded. Killing me won't change that." Maybe not all of it, and even if it was, dead witnesses can't testify in court. Eli's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, the platform shuddered with the impact of something heavy striking the tower's support structure. Maya risked a glance over the railing, and saw Echo scaling the tower's framework with impossible agility, using the cross braces and support beams like a ladder designed for his hybrid physiology. The wolf dog reached the platform level in seconds, launching himself through the gap between railings with deadly precision. Eli spun toward the new threat, but Echo was already inside his guard, 60 pounds of muscle and fury colliding with the man's chest. Eli stumbled backward, his rifle clattering across the platform as he fought to maintain his balance. Echo's jaws snapped inches from his throat, held back only by Eli's forearm pressed against the animal's chest. Maya didn't hesitate. She fired her final flare directly into the platform's decking, creating a wall of flame and smoke between herself and Eli. The burning chemicals would provide cover for perhaps 30 seconds, long enough to implement the escape plan she had been forming since first climbing the tower. The fire tower's design included an emergency evacuation system, a steel cable that ran from the platform to an anchor point nearly 200 yards away. It was designed to allow firefighters to evacuate quickly if the tower became compromised, sliding down the cable to safety like a zip line. Maya had noticed the system during her initial inspection of the platform, but she had dismissed it as too dangerous to use with her injured ankle. Now, with Eli recovering from Echo's attack and flames spreading across the platform, it represented her only chance of escape. She grabbed the emergency harness from its storage locker, clipping it around her waist with hands that shook from adrenaline and smoke inhalation. The harness was old, but appeared functional, its military surplus construction built to handle much more weight than her slight frame. Through the smoke and flames, she could see Eli regaining his footing, blood streaming from claw marks on his face where Echo had nearly found his throat. The wolf dog crouched nearby, hackles raised, waiting for another opportunity to attack. "Echo, come," Maya called, clipping the harness to the cable system. The wolf dog looked at her, then at Eli, his amber eyes calculating the distance for another leap. Maya could see the predatory intelligence in his gaze, the wild instincts that wanted to finish what he had started. "Echo, come now." Reluctantly, the wolf dog abandoned his stalking posture and bounded toward Maya's position. She grabbed him around the chest, holding him tight against her body with one arm while gripping the cable mechanism with the other. "This is going to be interesting," she whispered into Echo's fur. Maya kicked away from the platform just as Eli lunged toward them, his fingers barely missing her ankle. The cable sang with tension as they accelerated down the steep slope, the forest rushing past in a blur of shadows and starlight. The ride was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Maya had ziplined before, but never at night, never while injured, and never while carrying a 60-pound animal. Echo remained perfectly still in her grip, as if he understood that any movement could send them both tumbling into the darkness below. They were perhaps 50 yards from the anchor point when Maya heard the gunshot behind them. Eli had recovered his rifle and was firing from the platform, muzzle flashes strobing through the smoke like deadly lightning. A bullet whined past Maya's head, close enough that she could feel the heat of its passage. Then they were in the trees, branches whipping past them as the cable carried them toward the forest floor. Maya could see the anchor point ahead, a massive pine tree with cables secured to its trunk 30 feet above the ground. She triggered the harness's braking mechanism just before impact, their descent slowing dramatically as friction heated the cable to burning temperatures. They hit the ground hard, Maya's injured ankle folding under the combined weight, but they were alive and relatively unhurt. Echo scrambled away from her immediately, shaking himself and looking back toward the fire tower with obvious displeasure at their undignified exit. Maya struggled to her feet, using the harness cables for support, and looked back at the platform now nearly a quarter-mile away. The tower was silhouetted against the night sky like a burning skeleton, flames from her flare still visible on the platform. She could see no sign of Eli, but that didn't mean he wasn't coming. Maya limped toward deeper forest, Echo ranging ahead to scout for obstacles. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit had resumed, but they were fainter now, more distant. Johnson and Parker were probably still dealing with the chaos Echo had created, and Eli would need time to climb down from the tower and reorient himself. But Maya's advantage wouldn't last long. She needed to find a defensible position where she could wait for Agent Quentin's rescue team, somewhere Eli's people couldn't approach without exposing themselves. As if in answer to her desperate hopes, she heard the distant sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the south. The helicopter's searchlights swept across the forest canopy like the eye of an avenging angel, its brilliant beam turning night into harsh, artificial day. Maya pressed herself against the trunk of a massive pine tree, Echo crouched beside her, both of them watching as the aircraft circled the burning fire tower in ever-widening spirals. Through the mechanical thunder of rotor blades, Maya could hear other sounds, the growl of ATV engines, the crackle of radio communications, the organized movement of a law enforcement operation finally arriving in force. Agent Lara Quinton had responded with everything she could muster, and Maya felt a surge of gratitude mixed with profound relief. "Federal agents! This area is surrounded!" The voice boomed from the helicopter's loudspeaker system, carrying across miles of forest with mechanical authority. "Lay down your weapons and surrender immediately." Maya activated the small LED beacon she carried for emergencies, its strobing red light visible through the forest canopy. Within moments, the helicopter's searchlight found her position, bathing her and Echo in brilliant white illumination. A voice crackled from a handheld radio that rappelled down from the aircraft on a thin cable. "Identify yourself." Maya grabbed the radio, her voice hoarse from smoke inhalation and exhaustion. "Maya Lin, I'm the one who transmitted the emergency data to Agent Quinton." "Roger that. Stay in position. Ground teams are en route to your location." The next few minutes passed in a blur of organized chaos. Maya watched through the trees as tactical teams surrounded the fire tower, their coordinated movements visible in the helicopter's searchlight. Gunfire erupted briefly, sharp, professional bursts that suggested resistance and swift suppression. Then silence. Agent Lara Quinton emerged from the forest like a figure from Maya's professional past, compact, intense, moving with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to command. She was accompanied by 2 tactical officers and a medic, all of them wearing full combat gear and night vision equipment. "Ms. Lin?" Quinton's voice carried the careful neutrality of a federal agent meeting an unknown quantity. I'm Agent Quinton. We spoke through your associate, Ravi Singh. Maya nodded, struggling to stand as the medic moved toward her injured ankle. The evidence. Did you receive the transmission from the tower? We got it. 47% of your photographic data, plus audio recordings that clearly document illegal trafficking activities. Quinton's expression softened slightly. It's more evidence than we've collected on this network in 2 years of investigation. There's more. Physical evidence at their base camp, maybe half a mile northeast of here. Animal cages, communications equipment, documentation of buyers and transport routes. Quinton nodded to one of her tactical officers, who immediately began coordinating additional search teams via radio. We'll find it. Right now, I need to know about your condition and the status of the suspects you encountered. The medic was working on Maya's ankle, his gentle probing revealing that the joint was badly sprained but not broken. You need proper medical attention, he said, but nothing here requires immediate evacuation. The suspects? Maya asked. Quinton's expression grew grim. Eli Mercer is in custody, along with 2 associates. One of them required medical treatment for what appeared to be animal bites. She glanced at Echo, who was watching the proceedings with alert but calm attention. I assume that's your doing? Echo doesn't usually attack people, Maya said, scratching behind the wolf dog's ears. But he's protective when he thinks I'm in danger. Smart animal. Probably saved your life. As if summoned by their conversation, another tactical team emerged from the forest, escorting 3 figures in zip-tie restraints. Even in the harsh light of portable flood lamps, Eli Mercer managed to project an aura of controlled menace. His face bore the marks of Echo's claws, but his eyes burned with undiminished intelligence and fury. He looked directly at Maya as the team passed her position, his gaze holding promises of future retribution that made her blood run cold. But he was contained now, his network exposed, his operation shut down. The immediate threat was over. We found their base camp, one of the tactical officers reported to Quinton. 43 animals in various states of health, communications equipment, and enough documentation to build cases against buyers in 6 countries. This is going to be big. Quinton turned back to Maya with something approaching admiration. How did you know? What made you stake out that particular area? Maya thought about Jonas Dale, the quiet ranger who had first suggested that something was wrong in Sector 7. Local knowledge. Sometimes the people who live and work in an area know things that don't show up in official reports. And sometimes, Quinton said, it takes someone with your particular background to put the pieces together. I've read your file, Ms. Lin. Your work in Southeast Asia before the incident in Indonesia. Maya stiffened, waiting for the inevitable questions about her past failures, the judgment she had been fleeing for 3 years. Instead, Quinton surprised her. I also read the classified after-action reports from that operation. The intelligence your team was given was deliberately falsified. The backup that never arrived was diverted to a non-existent emergency. You and your people were set up from the beginning. Maya stared at the agent, feeling something crack inside her chest. What? It took 2 years of investigation to uncover the truth, but we eventually identified the source of the bad intelligence. Arms dealers working with the same network we just shut down tonight. They needed your team out of the way because you were getting too close to their operations. The words hit Maya like a physical blow, but instead of pain, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The beginning of forgiveness, directed at herself. Your people didn't die because you made the wrong call, Quinton continued. They died because someone wanted them dead, and they used your professionalism and dedication against you. Maya closed her eyes, seeing Decca's face one more time, but without the crushing weight of guilt that had accompanied every memory for the past 3 years. Her friend had died because of greed and corruption, not because of Maya's leadership failure. There's something else, Quinton said, pulling out a satellite phone. Someone wants to talk to you. Quote. Ravi's voice crackled through the speaker, tinged with relief and exhaustion. Maya, please tell me you're all right. I'm fine, Ravi. Banged up, but fine. When your signal went dark, I called every agency I could think of, pulled every favor I had. Agent Quinton here has been very patient with a panicked graduate student making wild demands. Maya smiled, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Thank you. For everything. Actually, Quinton interjected, I have a proposition for both of you. This operation tonight has blown open an international trafficking network that we've been trying to penetrate for years. We're going to need consultants with your specific expertise, someone who understands both the field science and the criminal methodology. Maya looked around at the organized chaos of the law enforcement operation, at the tactical teams coordinating the rescue of captured animals, at the evidence being carefully cataloged and prepared for prosecution. For the first time in years, she was seeing justice in action rather than injustice triumphant. What exactly are you proposing? A permanent consulting position with the Wildlife Enforcement Division. You'd work with field teams, provide tracking and surveillance expertise, help us identify and shut down operations like this one. The pay is government scale, but the work would be meaningful. Maya glanced down at Echo, who was watching the proceedings with alert interest. The wolf dogs seemed to sense that their long exile was coming to an end, that the woman who had rescued him from the ashes of Indonesia was finally ready to rejoin the world. "I'll need to think about it," Maya said. "Of course. But Maya?" Quentin's voice carried a note of genuine respect. "What you did tonight, the evidence you gathered, the risks you took, that's going to save a lot of animals. More than that, it's going to put some very bad people in prison for a very long time." As the tactical teams began the process of evacuating the captured animals and processing the crime scene, Maya found herself thinking about the photograph in her jacket pocket. Decca and the others would always be gone, would always represent a wound in her heart that would never completely heal. But their sacrifice had not been meaningless, and neither was the path that had led Maya to this forest, to this night, to this moment of choosing action over passivity. She had waited in the shadows for 8 hours, and one movement had indeed changed everything. Now it was time to step back into the light. Maya's cabin sat in a clearing 30 miles from the fire tower, so isolated that the smoke from the previous night's confrontation might as well have belonged to another world. She had built the structure herself during her first year of exile, using hand tools and timber salvaged from the forest around her. It was small, efficient, and utterly private, exactly what she had needed when human contact felt like sandpaper against an open wound. Now, as she limped up the familiar path with Echo padding beside her, the cabin felt different somehow. Smaller. Less like a sanctuary, and more like what it really was, a hiding place. The federal agents had offered her a ride, medical treatment, even a hotel room in town while the investigation continued. Maya had declined them all, insisting that she needed time alone to process what had happened. Agent Quentin had understood, perhaps recognizing the particular exhaustion that came from having one's entire worldview shifted in the span of a single night. But Quentin had also been clear. This was just the beginning. Eli Mercer's operation was only one tentacle of a larger network, and dismantling it would require sustained effort over months or even years. Maya's documentation had provided the initial break they needed, but there would be follow-up investigations, court testimony, and dozens of other cases that could benefit from her expertise. "Think about the offer," Quentin had said as Maya prepared to leave the crime scene. "The world needs people who can do what you did tonight. People who can disappear into the wilderness and come back with the truth." Maya made coffee with hands that still trembled slightly from adrenaline and exhaustion, then settled at her kitchen table with her laptop and camera equipment. Echo curled up beside the wood stove, finally allowing himself to relax now that they were safely home. The cabin's single room held the accumulated artifacts of Maya's 3-year exile: field guides and research journals, topographical maps marking every trail and water source within 50 miles, and cameras containing thousands of photographs documenting the natural rhythms of the forest she had made her sanctuary. But it was the locked footlocker beneath her bed that drew Maya's attention now. She had sworn never to open it again, had convinced herself that the contents were too painful to revisit. Inside lay the remnants of her previous life: official commendations and research publications, correspondence with colleagues from around the world, and most importantly, the complete investigative files from her Indonesian operation. Maya dragged the footlocker to the kitchen table, her injured ankle protesting the effort. The combination lock opened to her first attempt. She had never been able to forget those numbers, though she had tried. The smell of tropical humidity and old paper rose from the container like a ghost from her past. On top lay her Indonesian field notebook, its pages filled with meticulous observations about wildlife patterns, weather conditions, and the gradually accumulating evidence that had made her team such a threat to the trafficking network. Beneath the notebook were photographs, hundreds of them, documenting everything from rare bird species to the increasingly sophisticated poaching equipment her team had discovered. Maya had been building a case, piece by careful piece, creating the kind of comprehensive documentation that could shut down an entire criminal enterprise. That had been the problem. Her work had been too good, too thorough, too dangerous to the people who profited from the illegal trade in exotic animals. Maya connected her camera to the laptop and began reviewing the images she had captured during her surveillance of Eli's operation. The photographs were sharp and detailed, despite the challenging conditions, each one telling part of a larger story about systematic wildlife trafficking. She was halfway through the review when she froze, staring at an image that made her stomach clench with recognition. In the background of one photograph, barely visible in the shadows of the poachers' camp, was a wooden crate bearing a shipping label. The label was partially obscured, but Maya could make out enough of the markings to recognize them. The same freight forwarding company that had handled logistics for the Indonesian operation where her team had died. Maya enlarged the image, adjusting contrast and brightness until the label became legible. There it was, Pacific Rim Logistics, the same company that had arranged transport for the conservation equipment that had turned out to be weapons for the traffickers who ambushed her team. The connection was undeniable. Eli Mercer's operation wasn't just similar to the network that had destroyed her life in Indonesia. It was the same network, evolved and expanded but fundamentally unchanged. Maya sat back in her chair, her mind reeling with the implications. For 3 years, she had believed that her team's deaths were the result of random bad luck and her own poor judgment. But if Agent Quinton was right about the intelligence being deliberately compromised, and if the same logistics company was involved in both operations, then her people had died as part of a calculated move to protect a criminal enterprise. They had died to keep animals in cages. The thought filled Maya with a cold fury that burned away the last vestiges of her self-imposed guilt. Decca and the others had been murdered, plain and simple. The only question was what Maya intended to do about it. She worked through the night, cross-referencing shipping manifests and freight records with the network intelligence that Agent Quinton had shared. By dawn, she had assembled a comprehensive analysis, showing how Pacific Rim Logistics served as the transportation backbone for wildlife trafficking operations across Southeast Asia and North America. More importantly, she had identified patterns in their shipping schedules that suggested when and where the next major animal shipments would take place. As the sun crested the hills to the east, Maya made her decision. She pulled on her hiking boots, checked Echo's water dish, and limped outside to her truck. The cemetery where her teammates were buried was 2 hours away by mountain roads, in a small town that had served as their last staging area before deploying to Indonesia. Maya had visited the graves only once before, during the memorial service that had nearly broken her with its weight of official sympathy and unspoken judgment. Now she approached the weathered headstones with a different kind of reverence. These weren't monuments to her failure anymore. They were markers for people who had died fighting against something genuinely evil. Dika's grave was in the center of the small memorial plot, marked by a simple granite stone that bore his name, dates, and the inscription, "He served with honor." Maya knelt beside the marker and placed a small pine cone she had collected from the forest where she had spent the last 3 years. "I know the truth now," she whispered to the stone, "about what really happened, about why you died." Quote, the morning breeze stirred the leaves of the oak tree that shaded the memorial plot, and Maya took the sound as a kind of answer. "I'm going to finish what we started. I'm going to make them pay for what they did to you, to all of you. But I'm not going to do it alone this time." She stood slowly, her injured ankle sending sharp reminders of the previous night's ordeal. Echo waited patiently beside the truck, his amber eyes watching her with the patient understanding that had sustained her through the darkest periods of her exile. Maya's satellite phone buzzed with an incoming call. Agent Quinton's number appeared on the display. "Maya, I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to follow up on our conversation last night." "Actually," Maya said, settling into the truck's driver's seat, "I was about to call you. I've been reviewing the evidence from last night, and I think I've found something important." "What kind of something?" "The kind that connects Eli Mercer's operation to a lot of other cases, including some that go back several years. The kind that could help you roll up an entire international network." There was a pause on Quentin's end, filled with the kind of careful consideration that Maya recognized from her own investigative work. "How soon can you get to the regional office? I think it's time we had a much longer conversation about your future with the Wildlife Enforcement Division." Maya started the truck's engine, feeling something she hadn't experienced since before Indonesia: the anticipation of meaningful work shared with competent allies. "I can be there in 4 hours. And Agent Quentin, I'm bringing everything I have on Pacific Rim logistics and their shipping patterns. I think you're going to find it very interesting." "Maya," Quentin's voice carried a note of genuine admiration, "I think this partnership is going to work out very well indeed." As Maya drove toward town, Echo sleeping peacefully in the passenger seat, she caught sight of her reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at her was older than the one who had fled to the mountains 3 years ago, marked by solitude and hard-won wisdom, but her eyes held something they had lost in Indonesia: purpose. The ghosts of her past weren't gone. They would always be part of her story, but they were no longer her masters. Maya reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the worn photograph of her Indonesian team. For a moment, she considered leaving it at the cemetery with Deka and the others. Instead, she propped it on the truck's dashboard where she could see it. They would come with her on this new mission, not as reminders of failure, but as partners in the pursuit of justice. The Wildlife Enforcement Division's regional headquarters occupied a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Denver, its bland exterior concealing one of the most sophisticated anti-trafficking operations in North America. Maya limped through the facility's entrance 6 hours after leaving the cemetery, her laptop bag heavy with evidence and her mind sharp with newfound purpose. Agent Quentin met her in the lobby, accompanied by a lanky young man whose nervous energy and coffee-stained clothing immediately marked him as academic rather than law enforcement. "Maya," Quentin said, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Ravi Singh in person." Ravi stepped forward with the slightly awkward enthusiasm of someone meeting a professional hero. "It's incredible to finally meet you face to face. Your work in Borneo on leopard tracking techniques basically revolutionized how we approach field surveillance." Maya shook his hand, surprised by the firmness of his grip. "And your technical support last night probably saved my life. Thank you for that." "Actually," Quentin interjected, "Ravi's been working with us unofficially for the past 2 years, developing the same kind of surveillance networks you've been discussing. When your emergency transmission came through his equipment, he had federal agencies mobilized and en route before I even knew there was a situation." Maya looked at the young graduate student with new respect. "You coordinated the entire rescue operation?" Ravi blushed slightly. "I just made some phone calls. Agent Quentin did all the real work." "Don't let him fool you," Quentin said, leading them toward a secure elevator. "Ravi's system is what allowed us to triangulate your position when your communications went dark. Without his technical expertise, we would never have found you in time." The elevator opened onto a floor that looked more like a high-tech startup than a government office. Workstations equipped with multiple monitors displayed real-time data from wildlife tracking systems around the world. Wall-mounted screens showed shipping manifests, flight schedules, and what appeared to be surveillance footage from various international airports. In the center of the room, a conference table was surrounded by a dozen people in various combinations of federal badges, academic credentials, and field equipment. Maya recognized the mix immediately: a joint task force combining law enforcement, scientific expertise, and international intelligence resources. "Everyone," Quentin announced, "this is Maya Lin, the field operative who broke open the Mercer network. Maya, these are your new colleagues." The introductions were a blur of names and titles: FBI special agents with expertise in organized crime, Fish and Wildlife Service investigators who specialized in international trafficking, customs officials who understood the logistics of moving illegal cargo, and research scientists who could identify rare species from minimal evidence. But it was the woman seated at the head of the table who commanded Maya's immediate attention. Deputy Director Sarah Chen was perhaps 50 years old, with the kind of contained authority that suggested extensive field experience backing up her administrative responsibilities. "Ms. Lin," Chen said, standing to shake Maya's hand, "Agent Quentin has briefed me on your background and your recent activities. I understand you have intelligence that could significantly expand our current investigation." Maya connected her laptop to the room's presentation system, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. What I have is evidence that Eli Mercer's operation is just one component of a network that spans multiple continents and has been operating for at least 5 years. The first image that appeared on the wall screens was a shipping manifest from Pacific Rim Logistics, annotated with Maya's analysis of cargo routing patterns. This logistics company has been facilitating wildlife trafficking from Southeast Asia to North America, using the same routes and methods that were employed in Indonesia when my team was ambushed 3 years ago. Maya advanced to the next slide, showing a timeline that connected various trafficking incidents across multiple countries. The pattern is consistent. Identify effective conservation operations, eliminate the people involved, then move in to exploit the areas they were protecting. A murmur of recognition went around the table. Several of the federal agents were nodding as they recognized cases from their own investigations. The question, Maya continued, is how they identify which conservation efforts pose the greatest threat to their operations. Someone with access to government databases and international intelligence networks has been providing them with information about ongoing scientific research and enforcement activities. Deputy Director Chen leaned forward in her chair. You're suggesting there's a mole somewhere in the federal system. I'm suggesting there's a network of moles, probably including people in customs, wildlife services, and possibly international conservation organizations. The intelligence required to coordinate these operations across multiple countries and agencies would require access to classified information from several sources. Maya advanced to her final slide, showing a network diagram that connected shipping companies, front organizations, and government officials across 6 countries. Eli Mercer was field operations. The real leaders of this network are the people who told him where and when to strike. The room fell silent as the full implications of Maya's analysis became clear. They weren't just dealing with a criminal enterprise. They were confronting a corruption network that had infiltrated the very agencies responsible for stopping wildlife trafficking. Ravi was the first to speak. How do we identify the sources? If they have access to our communications and operational plans, they'll know we're investigating them. We set up a controlled information environment, Maya replied. We create false intelligence about upcoming conservation operations and see who responds. Classic counterintelligence techniques, adapted for wildlife enforcement. Agent Quinton smiled with something approaching predatory satisfaction. Maya, how would you feel about going back into the field? Not alone this time, but as part of a team specifically designed to draw out these corruption networks. Maya looked around the room at the assembled expertise, thinking about the 3 years she had spent in isolation and the teammates who had died because she had trusted the wrong people. This time would be different. This time, she would have backup she could trust, equipment that couldn't be compromised, and most importantly, a clear understanding of what they were really fighting. I'll do it, she said, but I have conditions. Deputy Director Chen raised an eyebrow. Such as? Quote, first, operational security for this task force stays completely compartmentalized. No information gets shared with other agencies without explicit approval from this room. Second, I want Echo certified as a federal working animal. He's part of my operational effectiveness. And third, I want full access to the intelligence files on the Indonesian operation. If we're going to catch the people responsible for killing my team, I need to understand exactly how they did it. Chen looked around the table, gauging the reactions of her team. The consensus was clear. They needed Maya's expertise more than they needed bureaucratic convenience. Done, Chen said. Welcome to Task Force Shadowhawk, Ms. Lin. I think you're going to find this work considerably more satisfying than operating alone. Maya felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. For 3 years, she had carried the burden of her team's deaths in isolation, convinced that she was the only one who understood the stakes of their work. Now, surrounded by people who shared her commitment to stopping the exploitation of the natural world, she finally felt like she had come home. There's one more thing, Maya said, reaching into her laptop bag. I want to show you something that didn't make it into my formal presentation. She pulled out the worn photograph of her Indonesian team and placed it on the conference table where everyone could see it. These are the people who died because we trusted the system to protect us. Dika Sari, wildlife biologist. Marcus Chen, field photographer. Elena Vasquez, conservation geneticist. James Kawanabe, logistics coordinator. Sarah Kimberly, team medic. Lieutenant David Park, military liaison. Maya's voice was steady, but her eyes burned with the intensity of someone making a sacred vow. They died because they threatened someone's profit margin. They died because good people assumed that other good people would protect them. I'm not going to let that happen again. The room remained silent for a long moment, everyone present understanding that they had just witnessed something more significant than a briefing. They had witnessed a commitment that went beyond professional duty into the realm of personal mission. Deputy Director Chen was the first to respond. Ms. Lin, I think I speak for everyone here when I say that we're honored to have you on the team, and I think your former colleagues would be proud of what you accomplished last night. Ravi cleared his throat nervously. Actually, there's something else. I've been working on an AI-powered surveillance system that could monitor wildlife trafficking patterns in real time. With Maya's field expertise integrated into the algorithm, we could predict where these networks will strike next, instead of just responding after animals have already been captured. Maya looked at the young scientist with genuine admiration. You want to turn my field notes into a predictive computer program? Essentially, yes. Your understanding of animal behavior patterns, combined with shipping logistics data and financial intelligence, could create an early warning system that covers entire continents. For the first time in years, Maya felt genuinely excited about the future. The combination of human expertise and technological capability represented in this room could fundamentally change how wildlife enforcement worked. Instead of always being one step behind the traffickers, they could start getting ahead of them. Let's do it, Maya said. Let's build something that would make those bastards afraid to operate anywhere in the world. Deputy Director Chen smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had just assembled exactly the right team for an impossible mission. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're about to revolutionize wildlife enforcement. Ms. Lin, welcome to the fight. 8 months later, Maya settled into the same camouflaged blind where her transformation had begun, but everything about the experience was different now. The equipment surrounding her represented the cutting edge of wildlife surveillance technology. Thermal imaging cameras that could detect animal movement through dense canopy, acoustic sensors that could identify species by their vocalizations, and satellite communication systems that provided real-time data links to Task Force Shadowhawk's command center. But most importantly, she was no longer alone. "Ghost, this is Command!" Ravi's voice crackled through her earpiece with the easy familiarity of a partnership that had evolved into genuine friendship. "All monitoring stations are online. We're showing clear weather for the next 6 hours." "Copy that, Control," Maya replied, using the call sign Ravi had adopted when he officially joined the federal task force. Beginning systematic survey of Sector 7, quote, Echo lay beside her in the observation blind, his amber eyes alert but relaxed. The wolf dog wore a specially designed harness equipped with its own camera system, turning him into a mobile surveillance platform that could access terrain no human could navigate. Over the past 8 months, he had become something of a legend within the Wildlife Enforcement Division, credited with locating evidence that had led to 14 major arrests. Maya adjusted her primary camera and began the methodical process of documenting the forest that had once been her refuge and was now her workplace. The transformation was remarkable. Where Eli Mercer's operation had left snares and traps, there were now motion-activated cameras that monitored animal populations without disturbing them. Where traffickers had once operated with impunity, federal agents now maintained regular patrols, guided by predictive algorithms that Maya and Ravi had developed together. The results spoke for themselves. In the 8 months since Task Force Shadowhawk had become operational, they had shut down trafficking networks on 3 continents, rescued over 2,000 animals from illegal captivity, and identified corruption networks within multiple government agencies. The intelligence Maya had gathered during her confrontation with Eli Mercer had proven to be the key that unlocked an entire criminal infrastructure. Eli himself was serving a 25-year sentence in federal prison, his cooperation with investigators having earned him a reduction from what would have been a life term. Pacific Rim Logistics had been exposed as a front operation and dismantled, its assets seized, and its personnel prosecuted. Most satisfying to Maya, the corrupt officials who had fed intelligence to the trafficking networks were now facing justice in courtrooms around the world. But it was the positive changes that gave Maya the greatest satisfaction. The forest around her blind was showing signs of ecological recovery that would have been impossible if the trafficking had continued. Animal populations were stabilizing, breeding behaviors were returning to normal patterns, and rare species that had nearly disappeared were beginning to re-establish sustainable numbers. Maya was documenting those changes when she saw the movement that made her heart skip. Through her telephoto lens, perhaps 400 yards away, a gray shape moved through the shadows at the edge of the tree line. Maya held her breath and adjusted her camera settings, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. A wolf. An actual wolf. Not a hybrid like Echo, but a wild animal that belonged to a species that had been declared extinct in this region over 50 years ago. Maya began photographing immediately, her camera's silent shutter capturing frame after frame as the wolf emerged fully into the clearing. It was a magnificent specimen, perhaps 80 pounds, with the lean build and alert posture of an apex predator in perfect health. But it wasn't alone. As Maya watched in growing amazement, 5 more wolves emerged from the forest, 3 adults and 2 juveniles, moving with the coordinated grace of a functional pack structure. They were hunting, their attention focused on a small herd of deer that grazed in the morning sunlight, completely unaware of the predator's presence. Maya's radio crackled with Ravi's excited voice. "Ghost, we're getting some very interesting readings from your position. Are you seeing what I think you're seeing?" "Control. I am observing a pack of 6 gray wolves, including 2 juveniles, exhibiting normal hunting behavior in Sector 7. Species was presumed extinct in this region as of 1973. The significance was overwhelming. Wolves were a keystone species, their presence indicating that the entire ecosystem had recovered sufficiently to support large predators. More than that, their return meant that the ecological damage caused by decades of trafficking and exploitation was finally being reversed." Maya continued photographing as the pack completed their hunt with the efficient coordination of animals that had never learned to fear humans. The adult wolves brought down a deer with minimal struggle, then began the process of feeding their young with the patient care that defined healthy family structures. Through her earpiece, Maya could hear the controlled excitement of the command center as Ravi shared the discovery with the rest of Task Force Shadowhawk. This was exactly the kind of success story they had been working toward, proof that their methods could accomplish more than just law enforcement. They could contribute to genuine ecological restoration. "Ghost," came Deputy Director Chen's voice over the radio. "Please confirm, are you documenting the return of gray wolves to a region where they have been extinct for 50 years? "Affirmative, Command. And based on the juvenile's apparent age and the pack's social structure, I believe they've been present in this area for at least 2 breeding seasons. We just didn't know they were here." Maya lowered her camera and looked around at the forest that had been her home, her sanctuary, and finally her mission. The morning light filtered through the canopy like liquid gold, illuminating a landscape that was alive in ways that would have been impossible when traffickers were systematically stripping it of its most precious inhabitants. Echo stretched beside her, his hybrid nature allowing him to sense things about the wolf pack that Maya could only guess at. His tail wagged slowly, a sign of contentment that suggested he approved of sharing his territory with his wild cousins. Maya's satellite phone buzzed with an incoming message from Agent Quinton, who was now leading field operations across the entire western region. "Preliminary reports suggest wolf populations may be returning to 3 other areas we've cleared of trafficking networks. Your methods are working." Maya smiled as she typed her response. "The forest is healing itself, we're just giving it the chance." She packed up her equipment with the same methodical care she had always employed, but her movements carried a lightness that had been absent during her years of exile. The work was far from finished. There would always be people willing to exploit the natural world for profit, always new networks to investigate and shut down. But for the first time since Indonesia, Maya felt genuinely hopeful about the future. As she prepared to leave the blind, Maya paused for one final photograph, not of the wolves, not of the forest, but of the small memorial she had placed in the observation post 8 months earlier. It was a simple plaque bearing the names of her Indonesian teammates, along with the inscription, "They served with honor, and their sacrifice was not in vain." The camera's shutter clicked just once, capturing an image that would never be shared with databases or used as evidence in court proceedings. This photograph was personal, a record of promises kept and missions accomplished. Maya shouldered her equipment bag and called Echo to her side. As they walked out of the forest together, she thought about the journey that had brought her from hiding in the shadows to working in partnership with some of the most dedicated people she had ever known. She had waited in the shadows for 8 hours on that October morning, and one movement had changed everything. But the real change hadn't been what she observed through her camera lens. It had been her decision to act on what she saw, to trust others with her discoveries, and to believe that individual courage could contribute to something larger than personal survival. The wolves would continue their ancient patterns, raising their young and maintaining the ecological balance that made all other life possible. The traffickers would face justice in courtrooms around the world. And Maya would continue her work, no longer as a solitary observer, but as part of a team dedicated to protecting the wild places and wild creatures that needed human guardians. Echo padded beside her through the forest, his amber eyes alert for movement and his hybrid nature bridging the gap between wild and domestic, between the world that was and the world that could be. Maya Lin had found her way home at last, not to a place, but to a purpose. The shadows that had once hidden her had become the shadows from which she watched over a healing world, armed not with weapons, but with cameras, knowledge, and the unshakable conviction that some things were worth any sacrifice to protect. The forest lived again, and so did the woman who guarded it. In the distance, barely audible above the wind in the pines, came the sound that Maya had been waiting 8 months to hear, the howl of wild wolves calling to each other across territory they could finally claim as their own. Maya smiled and quickened her pace toward the truck where Ravi waited with coffee and the morning's intelligence briefings. There was work to do, and for the first time in years, she was eager to begin. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.